My name is Liberato Bautista. I represent the United Methodist Church at the United Nations. My office is based in New York, and therefore my work includes a lot of referencing the so-called United Human Rights regime, which is, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So our foundational knowledge that I'd like to point out with respect to the topic of human sexuality has to do with, one, the social principles of the United Methodist Church, and two, the basic human rights precepts, the conventions with respect to human rights, whether they be civil, political, social, economic, or cultural rights. The challenge for us today, when we look at the understanding of the United Methodist Church with respect to human sexuality, is finding the linguistic nexus that link our social principles on one hand and the basic human rights document on the other. Now, let me read to you a few sections of the social principles of the United Methodist Church with respect to human sexuality. This is what it says. We affirm that sexuality is God's good gift to all persons. Dr. Fernandez cited that in his presentation. And then it proceeds. We call everyone to responsible stewardship of this sacred gift. The next section that I will read says, all persons, regardless of age, gender, marital status, or sexual orientation. Now remember now, the word sexual orientation is not alien to legislated text in United Methodist parlance. It's in the social principles. All persons, regardless of age, gender, marital status, or sexual orientation, are entitled to have their human and civil rights ensured, to be protected against violence. And the last section, or the last portion of that paragraph that I'll read says, we affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. The nexus that links or connects the understanding of the United Methodist Church by way of its social principles and the basic precepts that are found in the human rights instruments negotiated by nation states and civil society being a pillar of that, and therefore what we call the human rights instruments, the link is found in the affirmation that human dignity is the foundation of human rights. In the social principles, it is argued that human dignity is God's gift of their likeness in every human being. That's why the social principles argues that every person, regardless of age, race, class, gender, ethnic identity, sexual orientation, regardless of those categories, they bear the sacred image of God. That's the same affirmation as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that human dignity is the building block of human rights. Kofi Annan, the most beloved Secretary General of the United Nations, speaks of human dignity as the sacred home of human rights, precisely because of the recognition that human dignity, what we call human dignity, is the gift of the likeness of God in every human being. So the moment you denigrate, the moment you deface, the moment you violate the dignity of a homosexual, of a heterosexual, of a bisexual, of a gay, you're violating that dignity. On both counts, you're violating what the church says. You're also violating what the fundamental human rights say of that sacred worth. We quote the social principles left and right. We quote the Bible, the human rights instruments left and right. But these are two documents that we quote and invoke so much, but serve so poorly, precisely because of what Dr. Fernandez mentioned, that we are looking at the issue from a wrong frame. And I thank you very much for the reframing of the issue, because it is not about sexual orientation that is the problem. It is heterosexism that allows for intolerance and for discrimination to happen. Something unique in both of the documents, the social principles and the human rights instruments, is found in their affirmation, as I said, of human dignity. But something even more unique is there being unfinished documents. Within the United Methodist Church, we say that we have not only the right, but the obligation to revisit our mind every 4 years. We're a fickle-minded church. We meet every 4 years and revisit what we said 4 years ago. And if by science, and if by exploration, if by discovery, if by rereading the scripture, recollecting what the others that have gone before us, tradition, and by reasoning together, we exhibit certain experiences that already discount what we said 4 years ago, then we rewrite the text of the social principles. It is the same thing. I have the bottle of water. It is the same thing with the human rights instruments. Prior to the 1980s, there was no such thing as the rights of the child. But there was a prior understanding that every child has dignity. But because of the experience of the violation of the rights of children, child labor, sexual slavery of children, there was a need to inscribe in the form of rights what is now called children's rights. And therefore, the nature of the social principles shared by human rights instruments is that they are historically mediated documents. Slavery was supported by the Bible some two centuries ago. But our understanding now is that slavery is an abomination, that slavery is not in keeping with the teachings of Christ, that colonialism was a God-ordained thing for the West to do in all the rest of the world. We now know that colonialism is a sin, that it should not have happened. So they are historically mediated understandings. And so I bid that as we look at the issue of LGBTs, and I'm sorry, my apologies for having described it as an issue, for appreciating in this conversation those things that relate to LGBTQI, that we look at our understanding as an evolving understanding. Let me see. All right. Just last point, let me read another section of the United Methodist Book of Resolutions, which is a compendium of United Methodist understanding, again, of historical events and inscribing by use of text what they think of those social situations are. It's the one on globalization and its impact on human dignity and human rights. Here is what it says. Human dignity is the foundation of all human rights. It is inherent and inborn. So the dignity that each one of us, regardless of, and then we have that whole string of regardless of race, sex, gender, or sexual orientation, is inherent. Yun yung sinasabi natin na walang makakaalis sa atin yung ating pagkawangis, yung wangis ng Diyos sa atin. No? Human dignity is the image of God in each human being. Human dignity is the sum total of all human rights. Meron ka na niyan mula pa sa pagkapanganak. Ang wala ka ay yung mga karapatan, dahil ang mga karapatan ay nabubuo ang mga karapatan sa pamamagitan ng pakikilahok sa pakikibaka ng mamamayan upang magkaroon tayo ng rights. Those are historical products. The rights of workers did not come out of a silver platter. They were fought for by workers. The rights of women were in the past, the rights of women to participate in society was biblically justified na walang karapatan ng mga babae. Hindi na po pwedeng sabihin ngayon yon. Over time, we've learned and we have canceled in our minds what used to be justified biblically and theologically. So lastly, it says, we protect human dignity with human rights. So human dignity is God's gift of their likeness. Human rights is humanity's gift to itself in celebration of the gift. My bid to you is that we celebrate the face of the dignity that we have because it is God's gift, regardless of, and for tonight, really of one's sexual orientation or one's gender identity. Thank you very much.